I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm thrilled to be talking to the wonderful producers of the documentary company This Machine, who also are responsible for Big Vape, the rise and fall of Juul. We are joined by director and executive producer of the series, RJ Cutler, along with executive producers Trevor Smith and Elise Pearlstein. And I wanted to start by talking about the fact that for this piece in particular, you had source material in the form of the book that it's based on. And I love the idea that essentially someone has done a lot of the problem solving for you. You know, you're obviously still going to run into certain problem solving. But for all three of you, I was just very fascinated by how that really helped you in the process, particularly in the development stages, just with having someone who's already done some of the research, tried to figure out who's willing to talk on the record and other possible roadblocks that you might have run into otherwise.
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right in identifying Jamie Ducharme's book as source material for this series as a kind of key factor in what differentiated it from a lot of the other things that we have worked on. Jamie's an extraordinary reporter, and when our friends at Amblin first approached us about the project, the fact that her reporting and the book that she was working on would be a resource to us was very attractive, because it definitely gave us a strong foundation. The series is a thorough adaptation, though, and you're also, I think, wise to start this conversation off with a question about that, because it's one thing to have a book, it's another thing to turn it into a dramatic living series and to identify those people who are willing to go on camera, especially in a story that's so complicated, so fraught, is still involved in so much legislation, is still involved in so much kind of, you know, I want to say complicated emotions for the people who were the in it. You know, we told this story with dozens of people who were in it from moment one, people who joined the company from day one, people who expected the experience to be about one thing and then learned that it was about so many other things. And having those people come to us was an enormous producing task, and the kind of thing that I think Trevor and Elise would want to speak to as well. We had an incredible team of producers who worked with us, but we were leading them in that process. So, Trevor, you want to speak about, you know, just the booking burdens even?
Yeah, I mean, with a project like this, the burden is substantial, as RJ mentioned, and I think more than anything, it's about building relationships and building trust, and also tailor making a production schedule that really allows for that work to be done. Because more than anything, it just takes time. It takes time for those subjects to learn who you are, to look at your body of work, to have many different conversations that enable them to hear what you are trying to achieve with the series, and for you to articulate what you're trying to achieve with the series, and also for you to hear their concerns and try and walk them through the process hand in hand, and eventually get them to that point of saying yes. It really just takes a lot of time. And thankfully, RJ and others at the company have a body of work that sort of speaks to this kind of work that we can point to and give people a sense of trust, that they're signing up for something that is going to be definitive and real and honest, and that we're the kind of producers that live up to our word.
And how about for you, Elise?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's people take a risk when they go on camera, and a lot of the people working in this industry have other jobs now, you know, so they want to talk about the experience, but they are mindful of reputation and legacy. And you know, to Trevor's point, you build the trust, and then, you know, but I think with this particular story, people really wanted to tell it. So, you know, you also just rely on people doing the right thing and wanting to tell their story.
The other thing about the story of Juul in particular is that this story has been told a lot, but it had never been told in the way that we told it, which was a thorough, full recitation of the complexities involved in it. You know, it was, as we say from the beginning of the series, and this is what excited us about it, this is not a black and white story.
Yeah.
But there were so many kind of knockoff versions of the crisis of Juul that did tell it as a black and white story that people were suspicious. And as they came to understand, and believe me, no one said yes on first approach. So it was always a process. And the fact that we were saying to everybody, look, we're going to not only do the definitive version, we're going to do the version that understands that, the twist here is that the damn thing worked. We're gonna thoroughly explore the unintended consequences of big tech, which is what, is kind of the central theme of the series. But we're also going to show, and we're going to show all the mistakes that were made, but we're also going to show that the next time this comes around, maybe the technology, the design, the progress that was made can be applied in a way that can help to solve a worldwide crisis of 1 billion people who are still addicted to combustible cigarettes.
Absolutely. And kind of going back to what you were just saying there, RJ, about it being a process, and Elise, you kind of talking about the trust that people had to give you and saying yes to being on this. You do have participants in the series who aren't appearing on camera, but have spoken to you, and you have the audio usage, and you've kind of got a very consistent graphic design over them as they're speaking. And so where did that ideate from in terms of conversations that you're all having with each other of, we have these people that just aren't feeling fully comfortable sitting down in front of the camera and giving their name, but they're interested in sharing their experiences. So how are we creatively going to approach this?
Well, that was, it was a conversation much like you can imagine. You're trying to get people on camera, and the interviews are beautiful and they're beautifully shot, and that's the best. But we want to be able to, we're producers. We survive by our wits, and we always, there are a number of phrases you hear a lot around here. We gotta be light on our feet. We gotta stay on our toes. We gotta be as crafty as we can be. And if you don't want to be on camera, especially in this series, we thought, there's some things you want to do where somebody doesn't want to be on camera. So be it, then they're not going to participate. But in this series, we knew there was so much that certain people had to say. So if they didn't want to be on camera, there was an opportunity just to use their voice, or just to use their voice and an avatar, or no avatar, their voice disguised. We probably, there were negotiations with some participants that didn't pan out, that involved, can we use things that you've said publicly, but you'll say them again exclusively for us? That we didn't end up not doing. We didn't end up doing that, but there were, and then there were, for the founders, a lot of who couldn't speak to us for different reasons that we identify in the series, but a lot of it had to do with the fact that there's so much ongoing litigation. There was a lot of public material that we could rely on, and we did rely on that as well.
And going back to that idea that there's kind of this central ethos to the series about exploring the unintended consequences of tech and what happens when it works, but there's different consequences that you hadn't anticipated. What really strikes me about that as well is, yes, this is a story about Juul and vaping and e-cigarettes, but also it could be the blueprint for any number of businesses and industries in terms of just a really fascinating study of business and what works and what doesn't work, and the conversations and connection that you have with your consumers and your audience. And so how did you all want to tell a story that, yes, was very specific to this one company and their trajectory, but also that had that kind of broad scope in the approach as well?
Yeah. I mean, I think, Silicon Valley in general, it's the move fast and break things. And that's an interesting idea. But when you start applying that to public health, it gets pretty, pretty dodgy. So, I think the collision of Silicon Valley and health was always something that we were really interested in. And you're right, it's applicable to a lot of things, but I think we're seeing it with AI now. you know, there are certain things that you can throw out into the public and iterate, and then there are other things that maybe should not be done that way.
Absolutely. And RJ, you were talking a little bit before about the design of the interviews and wanting to have them aesthetically be really beautiful. And, you know, there's the logistical element of creating a set that could travel and be utilized in multiple different spaces if you needed to travel for subjects. But also it's very consistent in terms of what that backdrop is, what the lighting is, even having one of the cameras be essentially on a dolly tracking shot so you can move it during the interview and adjust the lighting as someone's talking. And so where did that very specific aesthetic for the interviews come from for you?
Well, thank you for asking the question and for noticing the detail as thoroughly as we would hope any viewer would. The idea was to kind of create the sense of smoke, a vape. If that's a central metaphor that can be relied on, we thought what an interesting thing to rely on that to inspire us visually. So what is that? What is that kind of, when you're talking about what you're looking at, when you're talking about a kind of dense environment that might be smoke filled, that's where light and contrast are all working together. This was, and it informed the graphics of the film, and it informed every aspect of it. And we have to shout out our colleagues, Lindsay Pinnell and Rachel Rapkin, who were the kind of showrunners who, you know, implemented a lot of and helped us with the nuts and bolts on every moment of this show, and were, you know, so there was a lot of work on that. We spent a lot of time on the look, on the feel, on the you know, the second unit, on the every visual element, on the drawings, and then Gareth Smith, who does our graphics, on the animation of the drawings. You know, there was so much of what this felt like, and we wanted it to feel. It all was tying into what the Juul was and what that meant kind of generationally, what the social media universe was like, and how to bring that to life in a visual way. And all of this, again, lives on the foundation of the fact that we had this amazing reporting from Jamie at the core. But how do you translate that? How do you translate good journalism into great nonfiction storytelling? And that was the challenge at every moment for us.
Right. And you know, I also love the fact that in terms of the information that you're all disseminating to the audience, that there's clearly a lot of thought that's gone to when is it to add more context, and when do we feel like the information presented is understandable within the rest of the context of the series. And maybe starting with you, Trevor, on this one, what were the conversations that you would all have of, you know, okay, if we're talking about angel investors starting to come into the company, for example, let's explain what that is, because it's actually very specific to the story, against moments where maybe you didn't need to add that second level of contextualization at certain points.
Yeah, I think to RJ's earlier point, this is a really complex narrative, and so much of this story does really live in the gray area. It's not a black and white story. So having the ability to tell this story over 4 episodes was really important to us, because context does matter. You know, it's important to figure out what it means to be an angel investor before you figure out who the angel investors are. It's important to know the landscape of big tobacco before you figure out what it means for a new startup to enter into that world. So having this context again and again was very important to us, so that we could really definitively explore this narrative and this world, and spend time on both sides of the aisle exploring this gray area, as I said, because again, it really is a story that deserves that sort of complex storytelling, and having the time necessary to do so was important to us in telling the story.
And it also feels like there was probably a sense of responsibility in how you told this story, especially because you are diving into the complexities and the gray areas of not just saying, this is good, this is bad. You're really going, well, this worked, but this didn't, and this is the problem. But here's what was successful, which is much more muddled. But, you know, there's one of the voices on camera that makes a point of, you know, even this series is essentially talking about the product, marketing the product. We're showing the marketing campaigns that they did that were really successful to a young audience in this series. And so how did you all approach making sure that there was that sense of responsibility in the way that you were telling this story, with the fact that you went into so many of those gray areas?
Well, that, you know, that informs all of the work that we do. You know, we're always feeling responsible to tell the truth as we understand it as fully as possible. And we're attracted to the complexity. That's, you know, that's that's what life is. You know, life is the gray areas and the nuances, and that's what people love in their storytelling, and that's what we love in the storytelling that we do. And there were a number of different approaches. I mean, one of the things you point out is that we point the finger at ourselves, and we always enjoy doing that too. And you know, because that we stand for the audience. So when we say by showing these things, we might be perpetuating the very problem here, we raise the question in the viewer's mind: is that, are we doing that? Am I doing that? How am I responding to this? What is attracting me to this story? What is exciting me about this and compelling me? So that's one thing. Another thing that we did was that even though we did not have on camera, James Monsies, one of the founders, I spent a lot of time talking to him, off the record. And it was very important to me to understand where he was coming from, even though at the advice of his attorneys, he couldn't be on the record presenting that himself. But our understanding, our collective understanding of what James and Adam were thinking at every moment informed every moment, so we could have a fuller understanding of the story. And that nobody had access in that way to them. So that was a big part of it.
Yeah, you know, and maybe Elise, I'll come to you for this one, because the series does constantly go back to what was the original mission statement of the company. And at each stage, it's how were they aligning with that? Here's how they were aligning with it to begin with, and here's where it kind of started to go off the rails, but they were still trying to achieve the same thing, even as the company grew into something very different. So how did you make sure that you were always coming back to that discussion of how does this connect to the initial idea and what they were attempting to do as a business?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the origin story of the movie, you know, their idea and you know, their desire to change the world and attack a huge problem was, you know, the impetus for everything they did. So, you know, I think, you know, there are a lot of systems, whether you're looking, you know, in movies that we've done in the past, whether it's looking at food or fashion, or, you know, where you know, sorry, you know, things don't people don't sit twirling their mustaches and, you know, plot out how things are going to go wrong. It's a series of small decisions and bad mistakes and, you know, shoulda, woulda, coulda. And I think it was important for us to keep, you know, going back to the origin, to show that this wasn't kind of like a master plan. It's not conspiratorial. It's just human choices.
I was also quite struck that you do have people who are speaking on camera that are vaping themselves in those moments as well, which kind of also really visually speaks to the addictive nature that's discussed in the series as well. And I was just curious if you anticipated that being part of any of the conversations that you were having early on.
Harper.
I think, you know, it was always, again, we wanted to make sure we were interviewing people that sort of spoke to all elements of this story. So when we interviewed people who were younger and still very actively juuling and very much have a strong social media presence, it wasn't intentional that they'd be juuling on camera, but they, you know, they were welcome to be themselves, and naturally they were people that juuled a lot.
I love that. And you know, I also really love when you have moments in documentary where people are speaking to camera and you get those little kind of off the cuff moments, like, you know, the young girl basically saying, oh, if I talk about fake IDs, that's not a problem, right?
Yeah.
And so for you, RJ, kind of like, where did you make those creative decisions of where you really wanted to include those little behind the scenes moments that really add a contextualization and an understanding of the people that we're talking to and makes them feel very human?
You know, again, this is we're always going to be human first. This is in a way, this is an unusual story for us because we're often there's an investigative part of it, there's a journalistic part of it, there's a news story part of it, there's a lot of that. But we're always character driven first. And so that's gonna inform us. And in that way, it's not an unusual project for us because it's about the human beings. And it's why we start with James and Adam and why we start with where they came from and what they were looking to accomplish. And it's why we get into the kind of guts of so many individual stories throughout. People who worked there, people who used the Juul, people who were affected, mothers, sons, daughters, everybody. We're telling this story in the guts of human experience, not anything else. And that's our value system at this machine, and it's the work that we do.
I also wanted to take a moment to touch upon one of your other projects, the disappearance of Cher Height, because that's so interesting in the facet that it's so heavily reliant on archival. You know, you have some present day interviews, but obviously she's since passed, so there wasn't an opportunity to include her in the film in a very different way. And so what's the difference in how you're approaching storytelling and documentary filmmaking when it's a project that is so heavy in terms of archival for all three of you?
Yeah, I mean, every documentary is its own unique animal. And, you know, to the earlier point, when, you know, the limitations become the creative impetus, you know. So with Cher Height, she was no longer alive, but she was so well documented. And, you know, in addition to all the footage you see, she had sold her archives to Harvard. And, you know, we had incredible access into her thought process through her writings and her journals, and, you know, even her imagining a movie of her life one day. So, you know, we get into the, you know, the human story. So with that, we really wanted to try to capture her voice and her aesthetic. And, you know, she luckily dated a lot of photographers and illustrators, so there was a wealth of material. But we also wanted to know her through the people who were really close to her. So interviewing, you know, modern day people who knew her, we just tried to kind of reconstruct, you know, what it was like to be around her.
Yeah. And Trevor, kind of coming to you for this one, the documentary landscape and the nonfiction landscape has really grown and expanded exponentially over recent years. And I was interested, even just in the time since you guys launched this company, which I think was 2020, so it's been about 3 years. How has that really changed the scope of filmmaking, the scope of storytelling, you know, even just with the fact that streaming has become very heavily led by a lot of wonderful docuseries like the one that we've just been discussing. And so how has that changed the scope of the way that you're all working as a company, even just in that short amount of time?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really exciting time to be doing what we're doing. I think in many ways, it's kind of the golden age of documentary storytelling and nonfiction. There used to be so few places to exhibit work, but now we're very fortunate to have so many streaming platforms and wonderful festivals and theatrical releases, and also the methods to tell your story is now vast. You can tell a one-part feature documentary, you can tell it in a multi-part way. It really it's up to the narrative to drive what's most important in terms of the vehicle to present that story. And we're fortunate enough to work with so many brilliant filmmakers, obviously RJ, but we're doing films with Nicole Newnham and Sam Pollard and Ting Pu, and they're these creators. It's such a fertile time for them. So it's really thrilling to sort of be at a place where we're really having the ability to work with so many great filmmakers at such a fertile time.
That
You know,
was, you know, sorry, do you want to go, RJ? No, it was just, you know, we started the company in 2020. It's only been 3 years, and, You know, we've released 8 projects in those 3 years, which is quite extraordinary. And in addition to RJ, I mean, the vision of the company was to have a place where RJ could do his work, but where we could also be a home for other leading filmmakers, both established and emerging. And, you know, it's incredibly gratifying to all of us that we've become kind of a leader in that premium documentary storytelling, and we've had the opportunity to make so much work in 3 years.
And these guys have heard me go on about this, but you know, we all share the feeling that this is an extraordinary time in nonfiction storytelling and in documentary filmmaking. We liken the moment that we're in now to what so many have referred to as this kind of golden moment in the 1970s for narrative filmmakers. The form is being pushed. People are at the height of their powers. There's, you know, we still have so many leading lights of the founding generations of the American documentary movement, and people who were inspired by them. You know, my great mentors were D.A. Pennebaker, who is sadly recently left us, but Chris Hedges as well, who is still going strong and doing great work and important work. And there's so many other colleagues who came before us who built this foundation that now so many people are thriving on and doing incredible work everywhere you look. I mean, you know, the lists are coming out of year-end work, and we see not only the great Nicole Newnham and the disappearance of Sheer Height, but so many other people who have done beautiful work that year after year is redefining the form and inspiring other filmmakers to do great things. So, you know, you know, markets go up and down, situations change, buyers come and go. But if you look at what the filmmaking community in the documentary space is doing, it is just an extraordinary time. And so, as Elise says, as a filmmaker-driven company, and as a group of artists and producers who are here making stuff and bringing others along on our journey, it's just been a great thrill.
And I mean, to your point, RJ, in terms of you having had the mentorship of someone like D.A. Pennebaker, and the 3 of you all touching upon the filmmakers that you're now working with as a company, as a director yourself, what do you feel are some of the best tools that you're able to pass along to the filmmakers that you're working with? Obviously, I know every project is very specific to the story that they're telling, but what is it that you try to impart and share from your experience?
I mean, it's really the same stuff over and over again. You know, the things that we've been saying, and that Penny said to me from the day I met him, and that Chris said, and that, you know, it's just like a real movie. These are the documentaries are cinema, they're art, and the viewer goes and sits in a movie theater and brings that art to life through the experience that they have interacting with it. And the work that we do is towards that end, and so that informs everything that you do, and it's the foundation of our work. You know, there's so many things that have to do with process and how you get from here to there, but that's where we're always going. We're always going towards making great movies. And you know, we want you to laugh, and we want you to cry, and we want you to stomp your feet, and you know, we try to get as close to that as we can, time after time after time, whether that's, you know, a movie about Sheer Height, or it's a movie about Elton John or Martha Stewart. The goals are going to be the same. Or if it's a series about Big Vape, we're here to do our best to make great cinema.
Well, luckily for us as audiences, you really have had the chance, even just in these first 3 years of your company together in this particular collaboration, to tell so many great stories. So congratulations on everything so far. And thank you so much for also
We've
talking
only
about
just
this
begun.
today.
Wait until 2024.
Can't wait.
We have a
Thank
big
you so
year.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to chat.